Welcome to the third APA lecture, where we will be talking about how to write using APA formatting. The topic of this lecture covers the 6 mechanics of writing, which include transitions, conciseness and clarity, tone, verb tense, active and passive voice, and pronouns. So, some things to be aware of when writing your paper. You want continuity or logical consistency of expression throughout your work. In other words, we want to avoid choppiness, and we do this by making sure our topics are in a logical order. For instance, you wouldn't talk about the results of your study before describing the variables you're interested in. We also want to be mindful of flow, where there's a smooth cadence of words and sentences. The order of your sentences and paragraphs should make sense or flow into each other. Also, make sure you're keeping irrelevancies and inconsistencies out of your paper. If you include things that are not important, it can make your work and ideas seem less credible. And remember that the purpose of your work is to keep readers engaged and for them to be able to understand your writing. Transitions can also help avoid choppiness of paragraphs, and there's different categories that transitions can fall into. If you are listing the steps you took to do something, you might use time links where you state words like first, then, after, and so on. If you want to explain cause and effect, like if you're using data to make an inference for something, you could use words like therefore or as a result. For addition links, maybe you're wanting to expand on a previous paragraph, and you could use words like in addition or moreover. And if you're contrasting information, maybe you're providing 2 different arguments in the literature, you could use words like conversely, however, or although. Subheadings are another great way to help guide the order of your paper, especially if you are transitioning to a new topic. Here are examples of subheadings taken from the APA manual. The picture on top shows the different levels of headings and how they should be formatted. You will start with level 1, which is the title of your paper and is centered, bold, and in title case, which means the first letter of each word is capitalized, and the text for that topic begins underneath as a new paragraph. The second level is flush left, bold, title case, and the text again starts underneath in its own paragraph. Level 3 is similar, but it's italicized, and so on. The image on the bottom gives an example of what this looks like with level 1 and 2 headings. I don't imagine needing to go into level 4 and 5 for this class, but the top picture is there in case you do need them. When it comes to conciseness and clarity, it is important to only write what needs to be written. Try not to go off topic and always ask yourself if the information is necessary to support my idea. The more concise and frugal you are with your words, the more readable your work will be. On the flip side of that, the more fluff you add to make your paper longer, the more your work becomes diluted and the meaning is lost. It's okay to have a longer paper as long as it's communicating something important to that topic. Professors can see when students just add fluff to reach a word count or a page length. The benefit of using concise language is that it reduces wordiness and redundancy. If you have a wordy sentence, your reader might not immediately understand what you are saying, which loses their attention. Likewise, if you tell the reader the same thing over and over, they aren't gaining any new information and you also lose their attention. And it is important to remember that scientific writing is very objective. We are not sharing our opinions and should avoid words like feel, think, and believe. Make sure you're sticking to the facts. It's also important to keep the same meaning of words and phrases throughout your papers, especially if words can have double meanings. Make sure you are clearly defining your topics and talking about them in a consistent way. When it comes to tone in scientific writing, Yes, it is objective, but that doesn't mean it has to be dull. You can let your voice shine through. However, try to write in a way that is both informative but also persuasive. If you are trying to make an argument for interpreting your data in a specific way or advocating for a specific theory, it's okay to try to persuade your reader. And know that we don't necessarily know who our reader is. They might be a researcher familiar with your work, or they might be completely unfamiliar with scientific writing. So keep a broad audience in mind when you are writing your paper. Some things to avoid in your paper. First, try to avoid jargon. Don't use unfamiliar terminology to those outside of a specific group of people. Not everyone is going to know what working memory is or what behavioral economics is. If you do need to introduce a term, define it in a way that is understandable. The language you use should allow readers to understand even if they are not experts. Also, avoid anthropomorphism, where you attribute human characteristics to animals or inanimate objects. If you want to measure best practices for dog training, you wouldn't say that a dog enjoyed a particular method because the dog can't tell you what it's feeling. Likewise, you wouldn't say that a statistical program like JASP found a correlation between two variables, but rather this specific test was run and revealed a correlation between X, Y, and Z. And lastly, do not use contractions in formal writing. Make sure you are spelling out words like don't, can't, and so on. Be careful about verb tense in your paper. Use past tense when expressing an action or condition that occurred at a specific, definite time in the past. Comparatively, you would use present perfect tense when expressing a past action or condition that did not occur at a specific definite time, or to describe action beginning in the past and continuing into the present. Let's look at some examples of these. So on the left-hand side of the image, you can see different paper sections. Starting with the literature review or any other point in which the paper is talking about cited research, you have the option of past tense and saying Martin 2020 addressed. Or you could use the present perfect tense and say researchers have studied. The difference is really in how specific the sentence is. One gives a year, and the other gives something a little more broad that happened without a specific time point. The method section uses very similar language. But as you can see, some paper sections differ in tense. For example, when you are talking about your results, you always use past tense because there is a specific point in time in which this has happened. You wouldn't say results have found, you would use results showed. Skip down to the discussion and conclusion section because you will be leaving your personal reactions out of the paper. But note that these last sections use present tense. Your interpretation of the data is what you believe today. Make sure you're not talking about it like some theory that was thrown away decades ago. Use words like the results indicate, the limitations are, and so on. When it comes to active and passive voice, both are allowed, but make sure you are being fairly consistent so you're not disrupting the flow of your paper. Active voice is when the subject of a sentence is presented first, followed by the verb, and then the object of the verb. And you can see that each of these are color-coded, the example being the participants completed the survey, the participants being the subject, completed being the verb, and the survey being the object of the verb. Passive voice is when the object of the verb is presented first, followed by the verb, and then the subject last. Essentially, the subject and object are just switched. So the participants completed the survey becomes the survey was completed by the participants. A pronoun is a noun phrase that stands by itself. If the paper is only written by yourself, use the pronoun I. If you have co-authors or collaborators, you can use the pronoun we. This isn't the most formal version of scientific writing, but it is acceptable. Just make sure to never refer to your co-author or yourself in the third person. You wouldn't say, the researchers conducted a study when referring to yourselves. And use the word participants when referring to the people in your study. So we have to make sure we are using terms consistent with the scientific literature. You can measure someone's sex assigned at birth and gender identity, but know that these two constructs are defined differently in the literature and capture different information. Race and ethnicity are also constructs that tend to be misused, so make sure you know what exactly it is you want to measure in your study, and consider allowing participants to check multiple boxes or use a fill-in-the-blank question to make sure you are capturing the range of answers. Chapter 5 in the APA manual has more information on this. And if you are referring to multiple people or you are unsure of someone's gender, you can use the word they as opposed to his and or her. I find that it tends to help with concise writing. For punctuation rules, use quotation marks to introduce a word or phrase used as an ironic comment, slang, or invented expression. For instance, she was feeling under the weather, or he is a party animal. While this isn't the objective writing I'm looking for in your paper, if you had a question like this presented to participants in your survey and needed to report on it, this is how you would do it. Next, use parentheses to set off structurally independent elements. The example here is results are statistically significant, see figure 2, and figure 2 is separated from the sentence. You also use parentheses to introduce an abbreviation. For instance, if you want to talk about attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, you would spell it out and then put ADHD in parentheses. And lastly, you would use parentheses to identify anchors of a scale. For example, if you had a 1 to 5 scale, with 1 being all the time and 5 being never, those adjectives would be in the parentheses. Looking at numbers, use number formatting when numbers are 10 and above, when numbers precede a unit of measurement, such as having a 5 milligram dose, when you are talking about statistical or mathematical functions, such as something being multiplied by 5, when you are using dates, or when you are reporting scores or points on a scale. Alternatively, spell out the full number when numbers are below 10, for instance, if there are 3 participants, if numbers are at the beginning of a sentence, and if they are common fractions, such as 1/3 of students. And that's all I have for you. Thank you, and I'll see you in the next APA lecture.